All right, guys and girls, we are back. Thanks for sticking around on the AlwaysMoto Podcast, episode 55. Let's jump into the emergency department. The emergency department. All the injuries, all the gory details, and when they'll be back on track. It's the list you really don't want to be on. I say it all the time. You don't want to be on this list at all if you can help it, but unfortunately, hashtag injuries are a part of moto, and it seems to be the case again this week after Seattle. A couple more injuries added to the list, and we have lost a few more riders heading into the Glendale round. Now, some things to note from last week. Mumford was back on that PC bike for the first time for his ride. He did quite well considering he's had a very rough end of 2022, beginning of 2023 with injuries. He had that wrist injury. He had that calf tear. But he looked really good. He looked solid. He might not have had the complete fitness to run the whole 15+1, which I kind of expected. But he did surprise me still. His result was good, and he looked like he was racy during the day in terms of one-lap speed. So things might be looking up for Carson here if he can manage to keep things together and avoid a further injury. But so far it looks like those injuries are recovered and things are looking up for Carson Mumford, which is nice to see. A little update on Dylan Ferrandis. He will be about 3 weeks into that 3-week concussion rehab that he spoke about just before the Seattle round. He did mention in that too that he would probably take about 6 weeks to return from that secondary or that concussion that happened earlier in the season, and then he had that press day crash in Daytona. So he's probably about time to be seeing some more images of him maybe coming back to the bike here in a week or so. And whether we see him on the Supercross track again this year or not, I'm not really sure on that one. I've got a feeling now that he had that second issue with the Daytona crash that he's going to just be waiting around until the Motocross series kicks off. And that's obviously more important for him to be there in that series because he's probably more likely to be getting podiums and getting those big bonus checks from those results in the outdoors, and he has shown so far in Supercross. So it would make sense for him to be trying to make sure he's fully recovered in time for that. And if that means that he sits out a little bit longer here, that so be it. But because he was already scored a fair few points, so in terms of qualifying for SuperMotocross, he should already be easily into that top 20 range. But have to see. He might make a comeback for it. He might not. We'll have to keep a bit more of a monitor on it. Again, we've mentioned this before, but him and his team are a little bit slack on giving those details out until right before the events. So we won't see anything from there at this stage. Now, one that'll be fitting into that same team because it's Star Racing Yamaha. Styles Robinson had a big one at Seattle in that main event. He was leading and then he got caught and passed by Jet, and unfortunately went down on the exit of those whoops. He seemed to smack his right shoulder on the ground. And initially when I watched that, it looked like he might have had an AC joint sprain or even maybe just some bruising to the shoulder joint itself. But then the only information that we've had since then has been the team press release that comes out that evening and said that Styles was fine. Now, that's all well and good when he's waving his arm around, maybe somewhat gingerly, post-race, but once the adrenaline wears off, things can change midweek, and we haven't heard anything since. Styles is very quiet on social media in general, but especially in the last few weeks. He hasn't really had anything up since his podium position that he got way back when in Anaheim 2, I think it was. So he's been very quiet on that front, so we're not sure if anything's happening there with Styles. I suspect he'll be good enough to race Glendale, but we don't know any difference at this stage. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Again, you might not know until race day with the Star Racing and Styles team, Styles there, because he just doesn't put anything out on social media, and the team is not very good on that side of things either when it comes to injury updates. Dylan Walsh is one that unfortunately had a major injury in Seattle, and I'm quite surprised that he didn't cause a red flag in terms of the position that he was in on the track during that race. He was at the end of that sand section, or partway through that sand section, in the middle or sort of the inside, which was more so the race line at that stage of the event. The race line became more of the outside of that sand section in the main events. But in those earlier races, it was more that inside line. And he was right on that, and they had this Alpine Star medical crew there treating him as well, and they had multiple yellow flaggers around him trying to protect him. I was surprised that didn't cause a red flag. But anyway, we've spoken with Dylan. Unfortunately, he had a tibia fracture, and he had a Had surgery pretty much immediately in Seattle that night and had a rod inserted in his tibia to stabilize it, which is the usual process for those tibia fractures where they are a mid-shaft or, direct bone through, not just a little crack here or there, but those major, complete breaks of a tibia. That's the usual process to have a rod inserted. Now, that's usually a 3 to 5 month process pending the initial surgery recovery, whether there's no infections and that the pain levels are managed well. It's usually about 3 to 5 months. There is the option to take that rod out at that point as well, but then that also then requires a further 6 weeks on top of that to have the recovery. So depending on what Dylan's rest of his season is looking like in terms of what events he wants to try and get back for, as to whether he will take those sorts of options or whether he'll leave the rod in the leg and, hope that nothing goes wrong with that in the future, because obviously there's a risk with the rod being in there. If you have another fracture to that leg, that rod might actually bend or break. Bend is a bad one. It's an immediate surgery required because that rod is then holding that leg in an altered position and, can alter blood flow, can restrict blood flow, cause tissue death, etc. But it also, if it breaks, then it's another sharp object inside that could cut arteries, veins, etc. So, look, these guys, I actually speak about it a little bit with Justin Rodbell in this next interview you'll hear later in the podcast, but these pro guys don't tend to have the same time as, the regular man to have these plates and screws and rods removed after an injury because they have to get back to racing to make some more money. So they don't tend to take that path, and they sometimes leave these things in, and then they can cause other issues down the track. We've all heard things like Jerry Robbins' plate in his hand. The screws coming loose this season and causing him to miss a few races. Other people have other issues that then need secondary work year or two or more down the track because of something that's been left in to repair a previous injury because they didn't have time to take it out because they needed to get back to racing. So we'll have to see what Dylan wants to do there in a few months' time when he's got that recovery going. But at this stage, we won't be seeing him back until mid to late outdoors at this stage, depending on if he's planning to compete in the US or not further for the rest of 2023. Ty Freehill, privateer Yamaha rider, and Trey, I'm going to say this poorly here, sorry, Trey Fierro, number 158 on privateer Kawasaki. They had an unfortunate landing on each other issue in Seattle in the LCQ. Ty managed to, and we've spoken to Ty, he's managed to collapse a left lung, bruise his left shoulder and left hip, and he's got a fractured left pinky. It's unclear at this stage, but when I spoke to Ty, which was not long after the event at Seattle, he was hoping to try and ride at Glendale. Now, I haven't been able to confirm that at this stage. We're waiting on a message back from Ty. It'd be surprising if he did. That collapsed lung is going to create a whole lot of problems for him to try and ride. He's going to be short of breath. He may even puncture it again just from the pressure of him taking deep breaths. So that would be a concern, but guys have ridden with worse things. So have to wait and see how he goes. We'll see if he gets back to us. We might provide an additional update on our Instagram socials pages there in the next day or so. But at this stage, I would suspect Ty is not racing Glendale. Now, Trey, he had a concussion as part of that injury. He's already seems to be passing his concussion protocol, which is great. And he's racing Glendale this weekend. So will be back. Unfortunately for Ty, he won't be. Now, with Ty's injuries too, he will most likely, if he can't race this Glendale round, I think he wanted to do it because it was sort of like a home round, or he had family or friends or something in the area that was really, he wanted to obviously be in front of. If he doesn't race that one, I dare say he's out for the rest of the season. Now, Julian Bennick, number 500, we posted this video on our social. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Unfortunately, he had a run-in with one of the other riders and managed to go sort of over the berm as such and break a thumb, which is very unfortunate. It's a 4 to 6 week recovery time frame for this one. It's only a small little chip right off one of the bones of his thumbs, right down near a joint line. Now, it's nothing major. You're not going to get surgery for this one, unfortunately, because it's so small. But it's still just going to take 4 to 6 weeks to recovery, and it's going to be, unfortunately, a bit painful, a bit restrictive. But yeah, he'll be recovered just fine in about 4 to 6 weeks. Probably given that time frame too, he's most likely going to miss the rest of the Supercross. Maybe make it back for 1 or 2 rounds, but have to wait and see again on how that initial recovery goes and if the bone knits together well straight away or not. Lots of factors in these recoveries. You can't just say 4 to 6 weeks, stamp it. there's so many factors that affect how that recovery timeframe goes. So I'm a little bit cautious to begin with, but once things start progressing, you can start getting a bit firmer as to if they're going to the normal recovery plan or not. So that's when we can start saying, yes, it's 6 weeks or whatever. But when it's the very first week or two, you've got to be a bit cautious on what your time frame is that we're talking about for these riders at this stage. Now, making returns this week for Glendale, not really anyone, unfortunately. There'll probably be Colt Nichols. I've missed him on my list at this stage, but I've just remembered that he will probably most likely be back this weekend. He will be recovered from that concussion from Daytona. He's been back riding on the bike, as per some interviews I've heard with other people on Pulp when Justin Bogle was talking about it. Well done to the Pulp guys. They put out some great content too, by the way. And obviously, if you're listening to them, if you're listening to me, you're probably listening to them. So you probably heard that aspect of it. But yeah, I love their content. It's fantastic. But yeah, so Colt should be back this weekend. That'd be awesome to see him back on that HRC Honda. He's got to try and put some results in on these last few rounds to see if he can get something tied up for the rest of the year and for the next season as well. So interesting to see how that goes. Now, Aussie Matt Moss is going to be back at Glendale. Now, everyone thought that little thumb tweak that he had at Oakland kept him out of Seattle, and that was not the case. We spoke to Mossy, and he just had some family commitments and other Aussie commitments for races and stuff that he'd sort of made to some local sponsors that were, covering the cost of those things in the week or so, just the last 2 weeks. So he wanted to do those, but he will be at Glendale, and he's back in the States already. He's back with his Barrack Suzuki team there. So look for Mossy to have a good race this weekend. I think he'll be on for a solid one this time round. So keep an eye out for Mossy. But that is all we have this week for the emergency department at this stage. Like we said, a little bit of a shorter show this week. We're keeping details tight. We'll expand on some things, obviously, after next week, because we're going to have a few more guys hopefully returning for the East Coast round at Atlanta following this week's race in Glendale. So we'll have to see how that all pays out when we get some more information after Glendale's done. So we might have a bigger section in next week's pod show. Now, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be back with our interview. Now, we have checked in with Justin Rodbell on this week's injury check-in. Justin, unfortunately, had that big Achilles injury, complete rupture of his Achilles tendon back at the end of November 2022, which has meant that he has basically had to miss all of Supercross this year. He is back on the bike, as you'll hear in this interview, only once or twice, and not on a race bike as yet. But that is coming here very soon, and he's hoping to be back ready to go for round one of the outdoors at Hangtown. So fingers crossed that he can get all that sorted and ticked off. But it's good to hear from Justin. It's been a while that we haven't seen him or heard from him, so nice to have him on the AlwaysMoto podcast. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with that interview. All right, the bonus section of the YouTube video for the emergency department that you won't hear on the podcast. It's only coming to you via this YouTube section. Some updates on some other injuries. Now, we've got some information even since, it's only a couple of hours since we recorded the podcast, but we've got more information that we'll add into this YouTube video. Cade Clayson has had a practice crash this week. He's managed to break a rib and collapse a lung. So many of you might have seen that picture of him in the hospital bed with a tube hanging out of the chest. That's to help re-inflate the lung. And he will be out of action for a little bit of time. But in messaging him recently, I'm not really sure what he's going to be up to. He's put down that he might be back for Phoenix, which I'd be surprised. But depending on when exactly that injury happened, whether it was early last week or middle or beginning of this week, he might actually be okay for Phoenix this week. We'll have to wait and see. But yes, just confirmation that it was a broken rib and a collapsed lung for Cade Clayson there on that Team PRMX Kawasaki. Our other injury update is Cameron McAdoo, another Pro Circuit Kawasaki injury. It's been just a horrible run for that team with injuries. McAdoo and the race Kawasaki PR have come out and said that a shoulder injury sustained in a practice crash this week will see him out of action at Glendale. So that's going to basically give first and second, at least to Jet and to RJ for this round, it would seem. It seems as they have basically, with Cameron, have locked down that podium positions pretty much for every race, except for the previous Triple Crown race that we had at Anaheim too. So maybe we see something different here. Maybe the Star Boys, Levi, and pending whether Styles is on track or not, maybe we see them up there. Maybe we see Enzo get a chance at that podium spot that he's been very close to getting in recent times. But yeah, just an unfortunate run again, continuing for the Proso Kawasaki guys, and Cameron McAdoo will not be on track this weekend for Glendale. No massive details about what the injury is. Hopefully this is just a bruising or maybe an AC joint irritation. Anything further than that, and this might be a bit longer than just Glendale, and we'll have to wait and see. He may then, in turn, once we get a bit more information, we may find out that he's actually out for the rest of Supercross. We'll have to wait and see. It sounds minimal at this stage, but all these team PRs, when they come out about these injury updates, they are very, very limited on details, and until we get something direct from one of either the team manager, a mechanic, or the actual rider themselves, I don't take too much info from them and just sort of note down when it happened, because they don't really give you the full picture, unfortunately. So we'll bring more to you hopefully next week on the next podcast or the next YouTube video. So check those out. But that's some extra information for you guys that are watching this YouTube video. So lucky you.